Welcome back to HOA Debrief. I thought it would be a warning, it was a campaign. I am standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, freezing, wearing a gray winter jacket and a blue knit cap. Earbuds still hanging around my neck because I ran outside so fast I did not even put them away. And Carol Johnson is screaming at me about a small seasonal porch flag I hung 2 days ago. She is gripping a stainless travel mug in one hand and waving a printed notice in the other. And she is yelling that my flag violates winter decor guidelines and that my guests will be cited or towed during the next snow emergency if I do not take it down immediately. I work as a construction project coordinator and I support family back home, so I cannot afford surprise fees or a tow bill. I ask her what winter decor guidelines, and she says the Meadowbrook Blizzard Zone HOA board approved them last month and I should have read the packet. I tell her I never got a packet, and she says ignorance is not an excuse, and that if I do not comply, she can fine me daily until the snow melts, and I cry. That is the moment I realize Carol is not going to stop. She is the special assessment coordinator, which means she can invent charges whenever she wants, and she has decided I am her new project. I moved to Burlington, Vermont 6 months ago for work, and I thought an HOA in a snowbelt neighborhood would just mean they plow the streets and salt the walks. I was wrong. This HOA treats winter rules like a religion, and Carol is the high priest. She tells me I have 24 hours to remove the flag, and then she walks away before I can even respond. I stand there watching her march down the sidewalk, and I realize I am shaking, and it is not from the cold. I go inside and I call my neighbor Tom, who has lived here for 8 years. He is a retired engineer, and he has a drone he uses to take overhead photos of the neighborhood for fun. I tell him what just happened, and he laughs and says Carol does this to someone every winter. He says last year she targeted a guy over a snowblower that was 6 inches too far into the common area turnaround, and she fined him $300 before the board overruled her. I ask him if he has any advice, and he says document everything and do not let her corner you alone. He also says he will keep an eye out and that if I need photos or witness backup, he is around. That same afternoon, I get a formal warning letter in my mailbox. It is printed on HOA letterhead, and it says my guests will be cited or towed during the next snow emergency if they park in any spot that has not been pre-approved by the compliance committee. I do not have guests over that often, but my sister visits every few weeks and my parents are planning to come next month. The letter does not say what spots are pre-approved or how to get approval. It just says non-compliance will result in immediate enforcement action. I call the HOA management company, and the receptionist puts me on hold for 15 minutes before telling me the compliance committee does not have office hours and I need to submit a written request. I ask when I will get a response, and she says up to 30 days. I tell her the letter says the next snow emergency, which could be tonight, and she says that is between me and the board. That night, the forecast shows a major storm rolling in, and the city issues a snow emergency declaration starting at midnight. I text my sister and tell her not to come over until the weekend. I move my truck to the far corner of my assigned spot as close to the curb as possible, and I take photos of the placement with timestamps. Then I sit by the window and wait. At 2 in the morning, I wake up to the sound of a diesel engine idling in the street. I look outside and there is a tow truck backed up to a car parked 3 spots down from mine. The car belongs to a neighbor I have only met once, and it is legally parked in her own assigned spot. I grab my phone and my jacket and I run outside in my boots and knit cap, earbuds still tangled around my neck because I fell asleep in my chair. Carol is standing next to the tow truck driver, holding her stainless travel mug and pointing at the car. I walk over and I ask what is going on, and Carol spins around and says this is HOA business and I need to go back inside. I ask the driver if he has authorization to tow from private property, and he looks uncomfortable and says the HOA called it in. I ask Carol for the work order, and she tells me she does not owe me paperwork and that I am interfering with enforcement. The neighbor whose car is being hooked comes running out in her pajamas and a coat, and she is crying and yelling that she is parked in her own spot and she did not violate anything. Carol tells her that during a snow emergency, all vehicles must be moved to the overflow lot. And the neighbor says she never got that notice, and where is the overflow lot? Carol says it is in the back of the complex behind the clubhouse, and the neighbor says that lot does not exist. It has been a snow pile since November. Carol says that is not her problem and the tow is already in progress. I pull out my phone and I start recording. Carol sees me and she screams that I am not allowed to record her, and I tell her we are on common property and I can record whatever I want. She turns to the driver and tells him to finish the job, and he looks at me and he looks at Carol, and then he unhooks the car and says he is not towing without a signed property owner authorization. Carol loses it. She yells that she is the special assessment coordinator and she has full authority, and the driver gets in his truck and drives away. The neighbor is standing there shaking, and I tell her to take photos and file a complaint with the management company. Carol points at me and says, I just interfered with official HOA business and I will be hearing from the board. Then she walks away, still gripping that travel mug, and I watch her disappear into the snow. The next morning I get another letter. This one is a fabricated violation notice with altered dates and recycled photos. It says I was cited for snow pile placement on January 8th, and today is January 10th. The photo shows a pile of snow on the curb next to my driveway, but I recognize the angle because it is from a storm 2 weeks ago, before I even moved the pile. The notice says I owe $250 and that failure to pay within 10 days will result in a lien on my property. I call Tom, and he comes over with his laptop. He pulls up his drone footage from the past month, and he has clear overhead shots of my driveway from the date on the notice. The snow pile is not there. It was moved 3 days earlier. Tom says Carol has done this before, recycling old photos and changing dates to make it look like someone is a repeat offender. He says the board usually rubber stamps her citations because nobody wants to fight her, but if I have proof, I can challenge it at the next meeting. I ask when the meeting is, and Tom says it is scheduled for next week, the day after another forecasted storm, when travel is dangerous and most people will not show up. That is Carol's move. She schedules hearings during storm days so only her allies attend, and then she pushes through whatever she wants. I decide I am not waiting for the meeting. I start building a case. I print out Tom's drone footage with timestamps. I write a formal rebuttal letter citing the discrepancies in the notice. I request copies of all HOA correspondence sent to my address in the past 6 months, and I submit a public records request for the meeting minutes where the winter decor guidelines were supposedly approved. I also reach out to the city to confirm the snow emergency parking rules, because I want to know if Carol is misrepresenting the law. 2 days later, I get a call from the city parking enforcement office. The clerk tells me that the HOA has no authority to declare snow emergencies or issue parking citations on private property, and that any towing must be authorized by the property owner or a designated agent with documentation on file. I ask if the HOA filed anything, and the clerk says there is no record of the Meadowbrook Blizzard Zone HOA board submitting any towing authorization. I ask her to send me a written confirmation, and she emails it to me within an hour. Now I have proof that Carol called in a tow without legal authority. That is a big problem for her because if the tow company finds out, they could sue the HOA for fraud, and if the board finds out, they could remove her from the coordinator role. But I do not want to play my hand too early. I watched her pile on threats because that is exactly what I needed her to do. Every time she escalates, she gives me more evidence, and the more evidence I have, the harder it will be for her to weasel out when I drop it all at once. The storm hits on schedule, 12 inches of snow overnight, and the plows do not clear our street until noon. The HOA sends out an email blast reminding everyone that all driveways must be cleared within 24 hours, and that snow piles cannot encroach on common areas or sidewalks. The email is signed by Carol, and it includes a line that says violations will be documented with time-stamped photographic evidence. I laugh when I read that, because I know her time-stamped evidence is garbage. That afternoon, I am shoveling my driveway when Carol shows up with 2 volunteers in reflective vests and clipboards. She calls them the Snow Compliance Squad, and they are walking up and down the street taking photos and writing notes. Carol stops in front of my house and she tells me my snow pile is 6 inches over the property line and I need to move it immediately. I ask her to show me the property line and she waves vaguely at the curb and says everyone knows where it is. One of the volunteers starts to say something, and Carol cuts him off. I ask the volunteer if he has any training in property surveys, and he admits he does not. I ask Carol if the HOA has ever conducted a survey of the property lines, and she says they do not need to because it is obvious. I tell her I will be happy to move the pile once she provides documentation of the property line, and she says I am being difficult on purpose. The volunteers look uncomfortable, and one of them quietly suggests they move on to the next house. Carol ignores him and tells me I have until tomorrow morning, or I will be fined again. After they leave, Tom walks over. He saw the whole thing from his window. He says Carol is getting desperate, and desperate people make mistakes. He says he has been reviewing his drone footage from the past 3 weeks, and he found something interesting. On the day Carol says I violated the snow pile rule the first time, his footage shows her standing in my driveway taking photos of a pile that was clearly on my property, not over the line. Then, 2 days later, the footage shows a plow contractor pushing snow from the street directly onto my curb, and Carol was there, watching it happen. Tom says it looks like she staged the violation. If you are enjoying this story, please hit the like button and subscribe for more HOA drama. I asked Tom if he can send me that footage, and he says he already burned it to a USB drive and he will drop it off tonight. I also ask him if he is willing to testify at the meeting, and he says absolutely he has been waiting for someone to stand up to Carol for years. That night I get an email from the HOA management company. It says a hearing has been scheduled for the following Monday at 6 in the evening to address my multiple violations, and that I am required to attend or I will be found in default. The email lists 3 charges: unauthorized seasonal decor, improper snow pile placement, and interference with HOA enforcement actions. The total fines add up to $800. And the email says, if I do not pay or successfully appeal by the end of the month, the HOA will file a lien. I reply to the email and I attach Tom's drone footage, the city confirmation letter, and my rebuttal documentation. I CC the entire board, not just Carol. I write that I will be attending the hearing, that I have multiple witnesses, and that I expect a full review of the charges based on factual evidence, not altered photos and fabricated dates. I also write that if the board proceeds with a lien based on false citations, I will pursue all available legal remedies, including small claims court. Carol calls me 15 minutes later. She is screaming into the phone that I have no right to harass the board with frivolous complaints, and that my attitude is exactly why the neighborhood has gone downhill. I stay calm and I tell her I am simply defending myself against false charges, and if she believes her evidence is legitimate, she should have no problem presenting it at the hearing. She says I have no idea who I am dealing with, and that she is the reason this neighborhood stays civilized. I tell her I am looking forward to the hearing, and I hang up. The weekend drags on. I spend Saturday organizing my evidence into a binder with tabs for each charge. I print out the tow company dispatch log that shows Carol requested the tow without legal authority, and I highlight the section that says the driver refused to complete the job due to lack of proper authorization. I also print out the city letter and Tom's drone footage stills with dates and timestamps clearly visible. On Sunday, I walk the neighborhood and I talk to a few other residents who have been targeted by Carol in the past. 2 of them agree to come to the meeting and speak during the open comment period. Monday morning, another storm moves in. The forecast is calling for 8 more inches by evening, and the roads are already getting slick. I get a text from Tom asking if the meeting is still on, and I check my email. The HOA sent out a notice saying the meeting will proceed as scheduled and that attendance is mandatory for anyone with a hearing. I text Tom back and tell him I will see him there. At 5:30, I load my binder, my laptop, and a USB drive with all my evidence into my truck. I put on my gray winter jacket and blue knit cap, and I drive to the clubhouse. The parking lot is a mess, half plowed with black ice everywhere, and only a handful of cars are there. Inside, the meeting room is set up with a long table at the front for the board and rows of folding chairs for residents. Carol is already there, sitting at the table with her stainless travel mug in front of her. She is wearing her red belted wool coat and pink knit hat, and she does not look at me when I walk in. Tom arrives a few minutes later, and he sits next to me in the front row. 2 other residents come in, the ones I talked to over the weekend, and they sit a few rows back. The board president, a retired accountant named Ed, calls the meeting to order at 6 sharp. He runs through the regular business quickly, approving last month's minutes and the treasurer's report, and then he says we are moving to the violation hearings. Ed reads my name in the list of charges. He asks Carol to present her case first. Carol stands up and she pulls out a folder with printed photos and a written statement. She says I have repeatedly violated HOA rules, that I have been uncooperative and disrespectful, and that I am a threat to neighborhood standards. She holds up the photo of the snow pile and says it clearly shows encroachment onto common property. She holds up a photo of my porch flag and says it violates the winter decor guidelines that were approved in December. She says I interfered with a legitimate towing operation and that my actions cost the HOA time and money. Ed asks if I have anything to say, and I stand up. I tell him I do, and I walk to the front with my binder. I open it to the first tab and I show the board Tom's drone footage from the date on Carol's snow pile citation. I explain that the photo she is using is from a different day, and I point out that the timestamp metadata is missing from her print. I show the city confirmation letter that says the HOA has no authority to call tows on private property without proper documentation, and I show the tow company dispatch log that says Carol requested the tow, but the driver refused to complete it due to lack of authorization. Carol's face goes red. She interrupts and says the drone footage is irrelevant because I still violated the rule, just on a different day. I stay calm and I say that if the citation date is wrong, the entire citation is invalid, and if she is using recycled photos with altered dates, that is fraud. Ed looks at Carol and asks if the date on the photo is accurate, and Carol stammers and says she may have used an old file by mistake, but the violation still occurred. I move to the next tab and I show the board the email chain where I requested copies of the winter decor guidelines and the meeting minutes where they were approved. I explain that the management company never sent me the documents, and I ask Carol to produce the minutes. She says she does not have them with her, and Ed asks the board secretary to pull up the December meeting file. The secretary scrolls through her laptop and says there is no record of any vote on winter decor guidelines in December. The room goes quiet. Carol says the vote must have happened in November, and the secretary checks November. Nothing. Ed asks Carol when the guidelines were approved, and Carol says she cannot remember the exact meeting, but they were definitely approved. I ask the board if they are aware that Carol has been enforcing rules that were never actually voted on, and Ed says that is a serious concern and they will need to investigate. One of the other residents in the back raises her hand. Ed recognizes her, and she stands up and says Carol fined her last year for having a snowblower in the turnaround area, and she paid the fine because she thought it was legitimate, but now she is wondering if that rule was real either. The other resident I talked to also raises his hand and says Carol threatened him with a lien over a broken gutter during a storm, and he had to hire a lawyer to fight it. Carol tries to regain control. She says these people are ganging up on her and that she has been doing her job for 3 years and nobody has ever questioned her authority before. Ed tells her to sit down, and he says the board needs to review all of her citations for the past year to determine if any other rules were misrepresented. Carol says that is ridiculous and that they are wasting time on a witch hunt. Ed says if she has nothing to hide, she should welcome the review. Then I pull out my trump card. I drop it in a calm 2-sentence statement, then let the silence do the damage. I say I also have a tow company dispatch log that shows Carol requested the tow without legal authority, and that the driver noted in the system that the HOA Special Assessment Coordinator claimed full authorization but could not provide documentation. The room freezes. Ed asks me to show him the log, and I walk over and hand him a printed copy. He reads it silently, and then he looks at Carol and asks if she called in a tow during the snow emergency 2 weeks ago. Carol says she did, and she says it was a legitimate enforcement action. Ed asks if she confirmed with the management company that the HOA had towing authorization on file, and Carol does not answer. Ed repeats the question, and Carol says she assumed it was covered under her coordinator role. Ed closes the folder and he says that assuming is not the same as confirming, and that if the HOA does not have towing authorization on file, then Carol acted outside her authority and exposed the HOA to legal liability. He asks the board attorney, who is sitting in the corner on a conference call, if that is correct, and the attorney says yes. If the HOA called a tow without proper documentation, they could be sued by the towing company or the vehicle owner. Tom raises his hand and says he has one more piece of evidence. Ed recognizes him, and Tom stands up and says he has drone footage that shows Carol standing in my driveway the day before the alleged snowpile violation. And then 2 days later, footage showing a plow contractor pushing snow from the street onto my curb while Carol watched. He says it looks like she staged the violation to justify the citation. He pulls out his phone and he plays the clip on the TV screen at the front of the room. The footage is clear. Carol is standing on my driveway taking photos. 2 days later, a plow truck is pushing a blade full of snow directly onto my curb, and Carol is standing 20 feet away watching. She does not stop the driver. She does not call anyone. She just watches, and then she walks away. The clip ends, and the room is silent. Carol stands up and she says the footage is taken out of context and that the plow contractor was doing his job. Tom says if the contractor was doing his job, why did Carol not report the snow encroachment as a plow error instead of citing me for it? Carol says she does not have to explain herself to him, and Ed tells her she absolutely does. He asks her directly if she instructed the plow contractor to push snow onto my curb, and Carol says no. He asks if she reported the plow error to the management company, and Carol says she does not remember. Ed tells Carol that her failure to remember basic facts about citations she issued is unacceptable, and that the board will be conducting a full audit of her work for the past year. He also says that effective immediately, Carol is suspended from her coordinator role pending the outcome of the audit. Carol explodes. She yells that the board has no right to suspend her and that she is the reason this neighborhood stays civilized, and that without her the whole place will fall apart. Ed tells her if she does not sit down and stop disrupting the meeting, he will call the police and have her removed. Carol sits down, but she is shaking with rage. Ed turns to me and says the board is dismissing all charges against me, and that I will not owe any fines. He also says the board will be issuing a formal apology and that they will be reviewing all of Carol's citations to identify any other residents who were wrongly charged. He asks if I have any further comments, and I say yes, I have one more thing. I pull out a petition that I circulated over the weekend. It has signatures from 18 residents, and it requests a special vote to remove Carol from the board entirely, and to institute new oversight procedures for any future enforcement actions. I hand the petition to Ed, and he looks at it and he says the board will schedule the vote for next month's meeting. Carol looks like she is about to pass out. The meeting ends at 8:30. I walk out into the snow with Tom, and he claps me on the back and says that was the most satisfying thing he has seen in years. I thank him for the footage and for showing up, and he says anytime. We stand in the parking lot for a few minutes watching the snow fall, and then we get in our trucks and drive home. Over the next 2 weeks, the board conducts the audit. They discover that Carol invented at least 12 rules that were never approved, and she issued over 30 citations based on those fake rules. The board refunds all the fines, and they send out a neighborhood-wide email apologizing for the oversight and promising better accountability. Carol submits her resignation before the special vote, and the board accepts it immediately. But the story does not end there. 2 weeks after Carol resigns, I get a call from a plow contractor supervisor who says he needs to talk to me about something. I meet him at the contractor yard and he pulls me into his office and shows me call logs and work orders. He says Carol contacted his company 3 times over the past 2 months asking them to push snow onto specific driveways after the regular plowing was done, and she told them it was part of a compliance documentation project. The supervisor says he thought it was strange, but Carol was convincing and she had HOA letterhead, so his drivers did it. When he found out Carol was targeting residents with fake violations, he realized she had been using his company to stage evidence. The supervisor says he is blacklisting the HOA from his service roster because he is not going to be part of a scam, and he is notifying all the other contractors in the area about what happened. He also says if any of the residents who were targeted want to sue Carol personally, he will provide the logs and testimony. I thank him, and I ask if he can send me copies of the work orders. He prints them out on the spot and hands them to me. That night I forward the work orders to the board and to the management company. The board holds an emergency meeting, and they vote to file a formal complaint with the state HOA oversight agency. The management company terminates their contract with Carol and flags her in their system so she cannot work with any of their other associations. The final showdown happens 2 weeks later at the plow contractor yard. Carol shows up unannounced, demanding that the supervisor retract his statements because she says he is damaging her reputation. The supervisor pulls the call logs and he reads them out loud, including the exact dates and times Carol called, and the specific addresses she asked him to target. Carol starts backpedaling, saying she was just trying to document violations, and the supervisor cuts her off and says if she was documenting violations, why did she tell his drivers to create the violations first? Carol has no answer. She stands there for a moment, and then she turns and walks out. A neighbor petition that forces a vote during the meeting succeeded in the end. The special vote happens in March, and the board approves a new enforcement policy that requires all citations to be reviewed by at least 2 board members before they are issued, and all residents must be given a chance to appeal before any fines are assessed. The policy also requires the board to conduct quarterly audits of all enforcement actions. In April, I get a letter from the small claims court. One of the residents Carol targeted is suing her personally for the cost of the fake fine plus legal fees. The case goes to trial in May, and Karen's timeline is proven false with timestamps from the contractor logs and Tom's drone footage. The judge rules in favor of the resident, and the HOA loses in small claims and pays costs because the board failed to supervise Carol's actions. The judgment also notes that the board is jointly liable for any future claims arising from Carol's fraudulent citations. In June, the board receives the final audit report. It shows that Karen's favorite fee, a snow pile removal charge she had been collecting for 2 years, gets proven imaginary in the ledger. There was no line item for it in the budget and no meeting minutes approving it. Carol had been pocketing the money. The board reports the findings to the state attorney general's office, and Carol is charged with theft and fraud. She pleads guilty in August and is ordered to pay restitution to all the residents she charged. I am still living in Burlington, still working as a construction project coordinator, and still supporting my family back home. The neighborhood is quieter now, and the new board is focused on actual maintenance instead of petty enforcement. Tom and I have become good friends, and we still laugh about the night Carol tried to tow a car without legal authority and got caught on camera. Every time it snows, I think about that morning in my driveway when Carol screamed at me about a porch flag. I think about how she said she could fine me daily until the snow melts and I cry, and how that one line became evidence of her intent when the board finally reviewed her conduct. I think about how she thought she was untouchable, and how a neighbor petition, a dispatch log, and a drone camera brought her entire operation crashing down. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you in the next one.